Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The winter air bit through my threadbare coat like tiny shards of glass, each gust a reminder that I didn't belong here. The village square buzzed with an energy that made my skin prickle. Anticipation mixed with fear, excitement tangled with dread. Everyone had gathered, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid afternoon, their bodies pressed close for warmth and gossip. I stood at the edge of it all, as I always did, my pale blonde hair whipping across my face as I tried to make myself smaller, invisible. "They say he's looking for someone," whispered Mrs. Halloway to her daughter, their voices carrying despite their attempt at discretion. "The king himself. Can you imagine?" I couldn't. I couldn't imagine much beyond the gnawing cold that had settled into my bones, beyond the fact that my fingers had lost feeling an hour ago, beyond the sharp awareness that every person here had someone to stand beside while I had no one. The presentation, they called it, a ritual as old as our people, where the Alpha King traveled to remote villages seeking... What? A mate? A companion? The stories varied depending on who told them. But the outcome was always the same. Some beautiful, perfect Omega would be chosen, would ascend to a life of luxury and power, and the rest of us would return to our ordinary existences. For someone like me, unclaimed, unwanted, barely tolerated, it was just another day of being reminded of my place, or lack thereof. My mother's voice echoed in my memory, soft and worn like the pages of an old book. "You feel too much, child. In this world, that's dangerous." She'd been right, of course. She'd been right about many things before the fever took her 3 years ago. Leaving me alone in a village that saw Omegas as either prizes to be won or burdens to be managed. I was neither beautiful enough to be the former, nor broken enough to be completely dismissed as the latter. I simply existed. In the spaces between, the crowd suddenly shifted, a ripple of movement that started at the far end of the square and rolled toward us like a wave. My heart kicked against my ribs. They were coming. "Stand up straight," someone hissed nearby. "Show some dignity." I tried, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The cold had wrapped around me like chains, and beneath it, something else. That familiar anxiety that made my chest tight, and my thoughts scatter like startled birds. I focused on breathing, on the simple act of pulling air into my lungs and pushing it back out. In, out. In, out. The King's Guard appeared first, massive figures in dark uniforms that seemed to swallow the weak afternoon light. They moved with predatory grace, scanning the crowd with eyes that missed nothing. Behind them, more guards formed a protective circle around a figure that made every Omega in the square, including me, go absolutely still. He was taller than I'd imagined, broader through the shoulders, with dark hair that fell just past his collar, and a face that could have been carved from stone. But it was his eyes that caught me, even from this distance. They swept across the gathered crowd with an intensity that felt physical, as though he could see straight through skin and bone, into the trembling parts of ourselves we kept hidden. The village elder, Mr. Thorne, stepped forward with the obsequious smile he reserved for important visitors. "Your Majesty, we are honored by your presence. Our finest have been prepared for your consideration. I'll make my own considerations." The king's voice cut through the air like a blade, not loud, but absolute, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to command attention. My fingers had gone numb. I curled them into fists, trying to force circulation, trying to focus on anything other than the fact that my body was betraying me. The shivering had started small, but now it rattled through me in waves I couldn't control. "Not now," I begged silently. "Please, not now." The king moved through the crowd, and it parted before him like water. Omegas preened and postured, each one more desperate than the last to catch his attention. Elena Moss, with her copper curls and practiced smile. Sarah Winters, whose family had spent a fortune on her dress for this very occasion. Even Becca Thorne, the elder's niece, who'd always been kind to me in private but now stood with the others, her chin lifted, her eyes bright with hope. I should have felt something, jealousy, perhaps, or longing. But all I felt was cold, so cold. My vision started to blur at the edges, a warning sign I recognized too well. Not here, not in front of everyone. But my body had other plans, shutting down system by system, prioritizing survival over dignity. My knees buckled slightly, and I locked them, willing myself to stay upright just a little longer. The king had stopped in front of Elena Moss. She was saying something, her voice pitched to Carrie, full of confidence and charm. He studied her with those piercing eyes, and for a moment, the entire square held its breath. Then he moved on. The process repeated. Sarah, then Becca, then others whose names I barely knew. Each time, the same careful assessment. Each time, the same result. He moved through them like a man searching for something specific, something he'd know when he found it. I tried to take a step back, to remove myself from whatever this was, but my body wouldn't cooperate anymore. The shivering had become violent, my teeth chattering so hard, I bit my tongue and tasted copper. The world tilted, just slightly, and I realized with a distant sort of horror that I was going to fall. Right here, in front of everyone. My knees gave out. I didn't hit the frozen ground. Strong hands caught me, impossibly fast, impossibly warm. The world swam back into focus, and I found myself staring up into dark eyes that held something I couldn't name. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition, or something stranger still. "You're freezing," the king said, and his voice was different now, softer, meant only for me. His hands moved to my shoulders, steadying me, and the heat of him was almost painful against my frozen skin. I'm sorry, Your Majesty." The words came out broken, interrupted by shivers. I didn't mean to. "How long have you been out here?" The question confused me. Everyone had been out here. But when I looked around, I saw what he saw. The others in their warm coats, their proper boots, standing in clusters that blocked the wind. And me, alone at the edge, in a coat 2 sizes too large that had belonged to my mother, with boots that had more holes than leather. "Since morning," I whispered. "Like everyone else." His jaw tightened, something dark flashing across his features. "Not like everyone else." He looked over his shoulder at his guard. "Bring my coat." "Your Majesty, that's not—" Mr. Thorne had appeared, his face flushed with something between embarrassment and anger. "She's no one important, just a—" "I wasn't asking your opinion." The king's voice dropped to a temperature colder than the winter air, and Mr. Thorne actually stepped back. I was giving an order. A heavy coat materialized, and the king wrapped it around my shoulders himself. It swallowed me whole, still warm from his body, carrying a scent that made something in my chest ache. Pine and smoke and something wild I had no name for. "What's your name?" he asked, his attention entirely on me now, and I felt the weight of every eye in the square boring into my back. "Wren," I managed. "Wren Ashford." "Wren." He said it like he was testing how it felt in his mouth, like it meant something. "When did you last eat?" The question was so unexpected, so personal, that I couldn't formulate a lie. "Yesterday morning." Something shifted in his expression. Anger, but not at me. Never at me. He looked at the crowd, at the village elder, at the well-fed faces that had never once asked me that question. "This is how you treat your own?" No one answered. What could they say? He turned back to me, and his hands were still on my shoulders, still holding me upright. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "That's not what I asked." His eyes searched mine, and I felt exposed, seen in a way I'd never been before. "Can you walk? Or do you need help?" The honest answer lodged in my throat. Needing help was weakness. Admitting weakness was dangerous. But something about the way he looked at me, the way he'd caught me without hesitation, made the truth spill out. "I need help. He didn't mock me, didn't sigh with impatience or look disgusted. He simply nodded, once. And then he was lifting me, one arm behind my knees, the other around my back, like I weighed nothing at all. The square erupted in whispers. What is he doing? Her? He can't be serious. She's nothing, she's nobody, but the king didn't seem to hear them, or if he did, he didn't care. He carried me toward the vehicles that waited at the edge of the square, his guard falling into formation around us. I should have protested, should have insisted I could walk, should have done anything other than curl into the warmth of him like a starving thing finally offered food. Your Majesty, I whispered. You don't have to. I know. He looked down at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. I want to. 3 words that changed everything. He placed me carefully in the back of a vehicle, luxury beyond anything I'd ever seen, with heated seats that made me gasp, and climbed in beside me. His guard took their positions without comment, as though their king regularly collected frozen, half-starved omegas from forgotten villages. Through the window I could see the crowd. Elena's face twisted with shock and rage. Sarah's eyes wide with disbelief. Mr. Thorne gesturing frantically, his mouth moving around words I couldn't hear. And beyond them all, Becca, who caught my eye and mouthed something that looked like, good. The vehicle started moving, carrying me away from the only home I'd ever known. Where are we going? I asked, my voice small. The king, this powerful, terrifying stranger who'd just upended my entire existence, looked at me with eyes that held depths I couldn't begin to fathom. Somewhere warm, he said simply. Somewhere you'll be safe. But as the village disappeared behind us and the road stretched ahead into unknown territory, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into a story far more complicated than a simple rescue. That this man beside me, this king, had seen something in me no one else ever had. And I had no idea if that would save me or destroy me. The palace rose before us like something from a fever dream, all stone towers and arched windows, imposing yet beautiful in the way dangerous things often are. We'd been driving for hours, the landscape shifting from the barren winter fields of my village to forests thick with ancient trees. And finally to this, a sprawling estate that spoke of power, older than memory. I'd fallen asleep somewhere along the journey, my body finally surrendering to exhaustion once warmth had seeped back into my bones. When I woke, the king's coat was still wrapped around me, but he was gone. In his place sat a woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that assessed me with clinical precision. You're awake, she said, not unkindly. Good. His Majesty asked me to see to your care. I'm Iris, head of the household staff. I don't understand. My voice came out rough, confused. Why am I here? That's between you and the king. She gestured toward the approaching palace. But first, we need to get you warm, fed, and properly dressed. You look half dead, child. I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but my body betrayed me again, my stomach growling loudly in the silence of the vehicle. Iris's expression softened, just slightly. When did you last have a proper meal? I don't remember. The admission hurt worse than the hunger itself. She made a sound low in her throat, something between sympathy and anger. Well, we'll fix that first. The next hours passed in a blur of overwhelming sensations. Iris led me through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors and tapestries depicting battles I didn't recognize. Staff members stopped to stare as we passed, their whispers following like shadows. Is that her? The Omega from the village? What was he thinking? I kept my eyes down, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other, trying not to feel like an imposter in a world where I clearly didn't belong. Iris brought me to a suite of rooms that were larger than the entire cottage I'd shared with my mother. A fire roared in an enormous hearth, and through tall windows, I could see grounds that stretched toward distant forests. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. Bath first, Iris announced, leading me to an adjoining room where steam already rose from a copper tub, then food, then rest. The king has requested your presence at dinner tomorrow evening, which gives us time to make you presentable. Presentable. As though I were a project to be fixed, rough edges to be smoothed away. But I was too tired, too overwhelmed to protest. I let Iris help me out of my ragged clothes. She said nothing about their condition, though her pressed lips spoke volumes, and into water so hot it almost hurt. I'd never experienced anything like it. In the village, baths meant cold water heated in small pots, quick affairs designed for efficiency rather than comfort. This was something else entirely. Luxury that made my chest tight with emotions I couldn't name. I sank deeper, letting the heat work through muscles that had been tense for so long I'd forgotten what relaxation felt like. "Your hair is beautiful," Iris commented, working some fragrant soap through the tangled blonde strands. "Like winter sunlight." I didn't know how to respond to compliments. They were so foreign, so unexpected, that they felt like traps. Clean, dressed in soft clothes that actually fit, I was led to a small dining room where food appeared as if by magic. Roasted meat, fresh bread still warm from the oven, vegetables I hadn't seen since autumn, and desserts that looked almost too beautiful to eat. I tried to maintain some dignity, some control, but hunger won. I ate until my stomach ached, until Iris gently suggested I slow down before I made myself sick. "Tomorrow will be challenging," she said, as she guided me back to my rooms. "The king. He's not like other alphas. He sees things others miss, understands things others ignore. Whatever he saw in you, it was real. But his court won't make this easy." "Make what easy?" I asked. "I still don't understand why I'm here." Iris studied me for a long moment, something like pity in her eyes. "You really don't know, do you, child? When an alpha king stops his search, when he brings someone back to the palace himself." She shook her head. "Sleep. Things will be clearer tomorrow." But sleep didn't bring clarity. It brought dreams. Fragmented images of dark eyes and strong hands, of warmth and safety, of belonging somewhere I'd never been. And beneath it all, a fear I couldn't shake, that this was temporary, that I'd wake to find myself back in the village, cold and alone and forgotten. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to close, disoriented by softness beneath me, by warmth that didn't require huddling close to dying embers. For a moment, I thought I'd died in the square, that this was some final kindness my mind had conjured. Then Iris arrived with breakfast, and the reality of my situation crashed back. "Eat," she instructed, setting down a tray laden with more food than I'd seen in weeks. "You have lessons this morning." "Lessons?" "Etiquette, protocol, court behavior." She softened at my evident panic. "Nothing too intensive today, but if you're to dine with the king tonight, you need to know the basics." The morning was a special kind of torture. A severe woman named Catherine taught me which fork to use, how to sit, how to speak, how to exist in spaces designed for people who'd never known hunger or cold. I failed constantly, my hands clumsy, my mind unable to hold the hundreds of rules that seemed designed specifically to make people like me feel inadequate. "No, no, no," Catherine sighed for the dozenth time. "A lady does not slump, spine straight, shoulders back. Project confidence even if you feel none." "I don't understand why any of this matters," I said, frustration finally breaking through my careful politeness. "I'm not staying. Once the king realizes his mistake—" "His Majesty does not make mistakes." Catherine's voice was sharp. "Whatever his reasons for bringing you here, they are his own. Your job is to not embarrass him or yourself." The words stung worse than any physical blow. Of course. I was a potential embarrassment, something to be managed and contained. The kindness I'd imagined in the king's actions had just been duty, obligation. He'd seen someone suffering and acted on instinct, but now he was stuck with me, a project his staff had to somehow make presentable. By afternoon, Catherine dismissed me with barely concealed disapproval, and I fled to my rooms like a wounded animal seeking a den. I stood at the window, watching the grounds below, where staff moved with purpose and confidence, everything I lacked. A knock at the door made me turn. Iris entered, followed by two younger women carrying garments in shades of deep blue and silver. "For tonight," Iris explained, "the king requested something that would complement your coloring. The king had requested. The king had thought about me. The notion felt impossible. They dressed me with efficient care, the gown flowing like water, soft and elegant in ways I'd never imagined clothes could be. They arranged my hair, simple, they said, but beautiful, letting the pale blonde waves fall naturally. When they finally turned me toward a mirror, I barely recognized the girl staring back. She looked almost worthy. "He'll be pleased," one of the younger women whispered, then blushed when Iris shot her a warning look. "Remember what you learned," Iris said, as she led me through the palace toward the dining room. "But more importantly, remember to breathe. The king is not your enemy." The private dining room was smaller than I'd expected, intimate in a way that made my heart race. A fire crackled in the hearth, and a table was set for two, only two. I'd expected guards, advisors, other court members. Instead, there was just the king, standing at the window, silhouetted against the dying light. He turned when we entered, and something in his expression shifted when he saw me, a softness around his eyes, a slight intake of breath. "Thank you, Iris," he said, dismissing her with a nod. Then we were alone. "You look well," he said, moving toward me with that same predatory grace that made something in my stomach flutter. "Much better than yesterday. Thank you, Your Majesty." The formal words felt clumsy in my mouth. "For everything. The clothes, the food, the rooms." "Cassius," he interrupted. "When we're alone, call me Cassius." The intimacy of it, his name, offered freely, felt like standing too close to fire. Dangerous. Tempting. "I don't understand," I said, abandoning protocol because I needed truth more than I needed manners. "Why am I here? Really?" He studied me for a long moment, then gestured toward the table. "Sit. Please, we have much to discuss." The meal appeared as we settled, staff members who entered and exited like ghosts, silent and efficient. I tried to remember Catherine's lessons, tried to use the right utensils, tried to sit with proper posture. But Cassius seemed unconcerned with formality. He watched me with those dark, penetrating eyes, and I felt stripped bare beneath his gaze. "You asked why you're here," he said finally. "The truth is complicated." "I'm not stupid," I replied, surprising myself with my boldness. "I might not know court politics or proper etiquette, but I can handle complicated." A slight smile tugged at his lips, the first I'd seen from him. "No, you're not stupid. That much was clear yesterday." He set down his fork, giving me his complete attention. "Do you know what I was looking for in those villages?" "A mate," I whispered. Everyone was half right. I was looking for someone, yes, but not just any Omega. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity almost overwhelming. "For years, my advisors have paraded perfect candidates before me. Beautiful, accomplished, bred for the role of queen, and every single one left me cold." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Then yesterday I saw you," he continued, standing at the edge of everything, freezing, forgotten, but still there, still enduring. And when I caught you, when you looked at me with those eyes full of fear and confusion and stubborn pride," he paused. "I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were exactly who I'd been searching for." The words hung between us, impossible and terrifying and thrilling all at once. "But I'm nothing," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm no one. I don't belong in this world. You belong wherever you choose to be." His hand reached across the table, stopping just short of mine, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat of him. "I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight, Ren. I'm asking you to stay, to give us, a chance. Get to know me. Let me know you. And then, when you understand what I'm offering, you can make an informed choice. And if I choose to leave," pain flickered across his features, quickly masked, "then I'll have a vehicle take you wherever you wish to go. With enough money to start over, somewhere far from that village that treated you so poorly." He meant it. I could see the sincerity in every line of his face. "Why?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "Why me?" Cassius was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "Because when I looked at you, I didn't see weakness. I saw strength that no one else recognized. I saw someone who'd survived despite the world trying to break them, and I saw..." He stopped, something vulnerable crossing his features. I saw someone who might understand what it means to be lonely in a crowd. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest. This powerful king, admitting to loneliness, to being seen but never known. And I realized, with a clarity that stole my breath, that he'd been telling the truth. We were mirrors somehow. Him in his palace full of people who wanted his power. Me in my village full of people who wanted me gone. Both of us utterly alone. "I'll stay," I whispered. "For now, to see. That's all I ask." His hand finally closed over mine, warm and solid and real. That's more than enough. The days that followed established a rhythm I'd never experienced, structured, yet gentle, demanding yet patient. Mornings belonged to Catherine and her endless lessons in deportment, though she seemed marginally less disapproving as I slowly absorbed the complex web of court protocol. Afternoons were mine to explore the palace grounds, always accompanied by Iris or one of the younger staff members, never quite alone, but no longer feeling like a prisoner. And evenings belonged to Cassius. We dined together each night, sometimes in the formal dining room, more often in his private study where conversation felt easier, less performative. He asked questions about my life, real questions, not polite inquiries, and listened to my answers as though they mattered. In turn, I learned about him. The weight of leadership assumed too young when his father passed, the constant pressure to be perfect, the isolation that came with a crown. "They see the king," he told me one evening, firelight casting shadows across his features. "Never just me." "Who is just you?" I'd asked. He'd smiled then, something sad and real. "I'm still figuring that out." 3 weeks into my stay, Iris informed me that the king was hosting a gathering, not a full court assembly, but an intimate dinner with his closest advisors and their mates. My stomach dropped. "I'm not ready," I said, panic rising. "Catherine says I still use the wrong spoon half the time, and I don't know anything about politics or—" "Ren." Iris took my shoulders, her grip firm but kind. "He wants you there, not some polished version of you. Just you." But just me had never been enough for anyone. The evening arrived too quickly. I dressed in a gown of soft gray that Iris swore brought out my eyes, my hair arranged in a style that took 2 staff members an hour to achieve. I looked the part, at least. Whether I could play it remained to be seen. Cassius met me outside the dining hall, resplendent in formal attire that made him look every inch the king he was, but his eyes softened when he saw me, and he offered his arm with a gentleness that steadied my racing heart. "They're going to judge me," I whispered as we paused outside the doors. "They're going to try," he agreed. "But I need you to remember something, Ren. You don't need their approval. You already have mine." The words were meant to comfort, but they only reminded me how precarious my position was. I had his approval now, but how long before he realized his mistake? Before he saw what everyone else saw, that I was fundamentally insufficient? The doors opened, and we entered together. 6 people sat around an elegantly appointed table, their conversations dying as Cassius and I appeared. I recognized some faces from portraits in the corridors. Lord Damien, the king's senior advisor, with steel-gray hair and calculating eyes. Lady Vera, his mate, beautiful and cold as winter marble. Commander Rowan, head of the Royal Guard, a scarred warrior with a kind face. His mate Nina, small and fierce with dark curls and assessing eyes. And 2 others I didn't recognize. A young man with auburn hair and easy charm who stood as we entered, and beside him, a woman with warm brown skin and laugh lines around her eyes. "Everyone," Cassius said, his hand steady at the small of my back. "This is Ren Ashford, Ren, my inner circle." The introductions were made with varying degrees of warmth. The auburn-haired man, Felix, Cassius's childhood friend and diplomatic liaison, greeted me with genuine friendliness. His mate, Mara, smiled like she actually meant it. Commander Rowan gave me a respectful nod, while Nina's sharp eyes seemed to catalog everything about me in seconds. Lord Damien and Lady Vera simply stared, their expressions carefully neutral in a way that felt worse than open hostility. We sat, Cassius at the head with me to his right, a position of honor that didn't escape anyone's notice. Conversation resumed, but I felt the weight of attention on me, even when people weren't looking directly my way. "So, Miss Ashford," Lord Damien said as the first course appeared, his tone pleasant but with edges underneath. The king tells us you're from the northern villages. I'm not familiar with your family name. There's nothing to be familiar with, I replied honestly. My mother was a healer. My father died before I was born. We weren't important. How modest. Lady Vera's smile didn't reach her eyes. But surely you must have some training, some education. The king's companion should be able to contribute to discussions of policy and governance. The criticism was delicate, wrapped in silk, but it landed like a blow. I felt Cassius tense beside me. Vera, he said, warning in his voice. I'm simply curious, she continued undeterred. What exactly are your qualifications? The table had gone quiet, everyone watching to see how I'd respond. I could feel myself shrinking, that old instinct to make myself smaller, to apologize for existing, but something else rose beneath it, a spark of defiance I'd thought the village had beaten out of me. I have no qualifications, I said clearly. No formal training, no prestigious lineage, no accomplishments worth mentioning in polite company. I know how to survive on very little, how to go unnoticed when noticed means danger, and how to recognize cruelty even when it's dressed in courtesy. Lady Vera's expression froze. Beside me, I heard Felix make a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. What I don't know, I continued, my heart hammering but my voice steady, is why that bothers you so much. Unless you believe worth is only measured by birth and privilege, in which case we simply disagree. The silence stretched. Then Mara, Felix's mate, raised her glass with a grin. I like her. As do I, Nina added, her fierce expression softening into approval. Anyone who can handle Vera's interrogations has potential. Even Commander Rowan nodded, something like respect in his eyes. Lord Damien, however, leaned forward. Potential is not preparation. The king's choice of companion affects policy, alliances, the stability of the entire realm. Sentiment is admirable, but we must be practical. Practical, Cassius repeated, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet I'd heard once before in the village square. Is that what we're calling it? Because it sounds remarkably like snobbery dressed as wisdom. Your Majesty? No. Cassius set down his utensils with controlled precision. You will not sit at my table and insult someone I've welcomed here. Ren's worth is not determined by bloodlines or court training. And if you cannot see that, perhaps you need to reconsider your own qualifications as an advisor. The threat was unmistakable. Lord Damien's face went pale, and even Lady Vera looked shaken. Felix cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Well, now that we've established boundaries, perhaps we could discuss the reason for tonight's gathering. He looked at Cassius. The northern border situation. Cassius held Lord Damien's gaze for another moment, then nodded. The conversation shifted to politics I barely understood. Territorial disputes, trade negotiations, security concerns. I listened, trying to follow, aware that this was a test as much as dinner. But as the evening progressed, something unexpected happened. Nina began explaining context when I looked confused, her whispered asides helping me understand the complexity of what they discussed. Mara engaged me in side conversations about the palace, about adjustment, about the challenges of entering this world from outside. Even Commander Rowan included me, asking my opinion on village security, a topic I actually knew something about. By the time dessert arrived, I felt less like a specimen under glass, and more like a person, part of something. When the gathering finally ended, Cassius walked me back to my rooms, his hand warm at my elbow. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Damien and Vera were out of line. They weren't wrong, though. I stopped, making him face me. I don't know anything about governance or diplomacy or any of the things a queen should... Don't. He cupped my face, his thumb brushing my cheek. Don't let their limited imagination become your truth. You held your own tonight, Ren. You were honest and brave and exactly yourself. That's all I've ever asked. But what if it's not enough? The fear I'd been carrying spilled out. What if I can't learn fast enough or fit well enough or... Then we figure it out together. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching mine. You're not in this alone, not anymore. The promise in his words, the certainty, made my chest ache with something dangerously close to hope. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Most of the court treated me with cautious politeness, keeping their distance but no longer openly hostile. Felix and Mara became unexpected allies, their easy friendship a gift I hadn't known I needed. Nina proved to be fierce in her loyalty once earned, and even Commander Rowan showed me kindness. But Lord Damien and Lady Vera remained cold, their disapproval a constant undercurrent. I caught them in whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. Saw the calculation in their eyes when Cassius showed me affection. "They're plotting something," Nina warned me one afternoon as we walked the gardens. "Vera hates that she can't control you, and Damien hates that the king won't listen to his counsel about choosing a proper mate." Should I be worried? "Yes," she said bluntly, "but not paralyzed. You're stronger than they think, stronger than you think." That night, I found Cassius in his study, surrounded by documents and looking exhausted. He glanced up when I entered, his expression softening immediately. "You should be resting," he said. "So should you." I moved behind his chair, hesitantly placing my hands on his shoulders. He went still, then slowly relaxed as I worked at the tension knotted there. "Nina says Damien and Vera are causing trouble. Nina's not wrong." He tilted his head back, looking at me upside down. "They're pushing for a formal council review of my choice, claiming it's about tradition and stability, but really it's about control." My hands stilled. "A review? Of you. Of us. They want to evaluate whether you're suitable to be queen." He reached up, catching one of my hands. "It's political theater, Ren. They can't actually prevent anything, but they can make things difficult. Then maybe I should..." "Don't." He stood, turning to face me. "Don't you dare suggest leaving. That's exactly what they want, to make you doubt yourself until you run." "I'm not running," I said, surprised by my own conviction. "I'm just trying to understand what I'm up against." "We," he corrected, pulling me closer. "What we're up against. And the answer is politics, pride, and people who can't imagine worth beyond bloodlines." His hands framed my face, thumbs tracing my cheekbones. "But they'll learn. I'll make sure of it." The intensity in his eyes stole my breath. We'd grown closer over these weeks, emotionally, intellectually, but this was something else, something that made my pulse race and my thoughts scatter. "Cassius," I whispered. He kissed me then, soft and careful, a question more than a demand. I answered by rising on my toes, by threading my fingers through his hair, by letting myself fall into something I'd never thought I'd have. Wanted, cherished, chosen. When we finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "Stay with me tonight," he murmured. "Just stay. I need to know you're real." So I did. We fell asleep in his study, tangled together on the large sofa, his arms solid around me, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear, and for the first time since my mother died, I felt completely safe. But safety, I was learning, was always temporary in a world built on power and politics. The council review arrived like a storm I'd known was coming, but hoped might pass us by. A formal summons delivered to my rooms at dawn, heavy parchment with ornate script that essentially commanded my presence before a panel of nobles who would determine my suitability to stand beside the king. Cassius was furious when he learned of it, his carefully controlled temper finally fracturing. "They went behind my back," he seethed, pacing his study like a caged wolf. Damien knew I'd never agree to this farce, so he gathered enough council signatures to invoke an old law, one that hasn't been used in over a century. "What kind of law?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear coiling in my stomach. "One that allows the council to review a king's choice of mate if they believe it threatens the realm's stability." He stopped pacing, turning to me with anguish in his eyes. "It's designed to prevent rulers from making choices based purely on manipulation or coercion. But they're twisting it, using it as a weapon." "When?" 3 days. He crossed to me, taking my hands. 3 days to prepare, and then you'll face a panel of 12 nobles who will ask questions designed to make you fail." I should have felt terror. Part of me did. But beneath it rose something else. That same defiance that had kept me alive in the village, that had made me speak truth to Lady Vera, that had brought me this far. "Then we prepare," I said simply. "Teach me what I need to know." What followed were 3 days of intensive education unlike anything Catherine's etiquette lessons had provided. Cassius, Felix, Mara, and even Nina took turns drilling me on history, politics, protocol, and the intricate web of noble relationships that governed court life. I absorbed information until my head throbbed, practiced responses until my voice went hoarse, learned to navigate questions designed to trap me into looking foolish or inadequate. "They'll try to provoke you," Nina warned during one session. "Make you angry so you lose composure. Don't give them the satisfaction." "They'll ask about your background," Felix added. "Try to make you ashamed of where you came from. Own it instead. Shame only has power if you accept it." Mara focused on presentation, how to sit, how to speak, how to project confidence even when terrified. "You're not begging for their approval," she insisted. "You're demonstrating why the king's choice was correct. There's a difference." Cassius was with me every possible moment, his presence both comfort and motivation. On the night before the review, he held me close in the darkness of his chambers, neither of us sleeping. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he murmured against my hair, "know that my choice stands. They can't force me to, don't." I pressed my fingers to his lips. "Don't make promises about defying the council. This realm needs stability, and if I'm truly the threat they claim, you're not." His arms tightened around me. "You're the best thing that's happened to this kingdom in years, even if they're too blind to see it yet." The review chamber was smaller than I'd expected, but no less intimidating. A circular room with 12 high-backed chairs arranged in a semicircle, and one simple wooden chair in the center for me. Cassius was forbidden from attending, though Felix and Commander Rowan were allowed as witnesses, standing silent against the back wall. Lord Damien sat at the center of the panel, flanked by Lady Vera and 10 other nobles whose names I'd memorized. Some looked curious, others openly skeptical. A few appeared almost sympathetic, though I didn't trust that any further than I could throw the heavy oak chair beneath me. "Miss Ashford," Lord Damien began, his voice carrying the weight of formality. "You understand why you've been called here?" "To determine if I'm worthy of standing beside your king," I replied, keeping my voice level. Though I'd argue that determination has already been made by the only person whose opinion truly matters. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. Lady Vera's eyes narrowed. "The king's judgment, while valued, is not infallible," she said smoothly, "particularly when sentiment clouds reason. We must think of the realm's future." "As must I countered. "Which is why I've spent the last month learning everything I can about governance, diplomacy, and the responsibilities that would come with the position you're questioning." "A month." Lord Damien's tone was dismissive. "Most queens in waiting train for years, if not their entire lives. What makes you think a month of study is sufficient?" "I don't think it's sufficient," I admitted, and saw surprise flicker across several faces. "I think it's a beginning. But I also think that different backgrounds bring different strengths. I've survived circumstances most of you couldn't imagine. That resilience, that perspective. It has value, even if it's not traditional. Poverty is not a qualification for leadership," Lady Vera said coldly. "Neither is wealth," I shot back. "Yet somehow, having never experienced hunger or hardship, you're all considered qualified to make decisions affecting those who have. How is that logical?" The chamber went very quiet. I could feel Felix's approval from across the room, see Commander Rowan's slight nod. Lord Damien leaned forward. "You're defensive, Miss Ashford. That suggests insecurity about your position." "I'm honest," I corrected. "There's a difference. You want me to pretend I'm not different, not inadequate by your standards. But I am different. I won't apologize for that. The question isn't whether I fit your mold. It's whether what I bring has worth despite not fitting it." For the next 2 hours, they interrogated me. Questions about history. I answered as best I could, admitted when I didn't know, and explained how I'd find the information if needed. Questions about diplomacy. I spoke of listening, of understanding different perspectives, of finding common ground. Questions about protocol. I recited what I'd learned, acknowledged what I still needed to practice. But it was the personal questions that proved most difficult. "Tell us about your family," one noble asked, an older man with kind eyes but a testing tone. "Your lineage." "I have no lineage worth mentioning," I said. "My mother was a healer in a small village. She taught me about compassion, about seeing people's pain even when they hide it. My father died before I was born. I don't even know his name. I'm no one, by your standards. And yet you believe yourself worthy of being queen?" Lady Vera's voice dripped with disdain. "I believe the king found something in me worth choosing," I replied. "Whether that makes me worthy is for him to decide, not you. But I also believe that worth isn't determined by birth. If it were, half of you would have nothing to recommend you beyond the accident of your parents." Sharp intakes of breath around the room. I'd gone too far, pushed too hard, but I was tired of performing, of pretending their judgment mattered more than my own sense of self. Lord Damien stood, his expression thunderous. "You dare insult this council. I dare speak truth," I interrupted, rising to face them. "You're not interested in whether I can learn or grow or contribute. You're interested in maintaining the status quo, in keeping power within familiar circles. You see me as a threat, because I'm proof that your carefully constructed hierarchies are arbitrary. Enough." Lady Vera was on her feet now too. "You're proving exactly what we suspected, that you lack the temperament, the dignity, the basic understanding of what it means to lead. You're a village girl playing at being queen, and it shows." The words landed like physical blows, each one finding the soft places where my own doubts lived. She was right. I was playing at something I didn't understand, pretending I belonged in a world that had never wanted me. But then, I thought of Cassius, of the way he looked at me like I mattered, like I was exactly enough, of Felix and Mara's friendship, earned not given, of Nina's fierce loyalty and Commander Rowan's quiet respect, of every moment over the past month when I'd chosen to stay despite being terrified, chosen to try, despite knowing I might fail. "You're right," I said quietly, and the room went still. "I am a village girl. I don't have your polish or your training or your certainty that I deserve to be here. But I have something you don't. I have the king's trust, not because I manipulated him or because my family connections demanded it, because he saw past all the things you think define worth and recognized something real." I turned slowly, meeting each noble's eyes in turn. "Judge me inadequate if you must. Recommend against me, but know that every word you speak against me, you speak against your king's judgment. And when history looks back on this moment, on this review, ask yourselves, will you be remembered as the ones who saw potential and chose to nurture it? Or as the ones who were so bound by tradition that you couldn't recognize value in a new form?" The silence that followed felt infinite. Then the kind-eyed noble who'd asked about my family stood. "I've heard enough," he said. "The girl has courage and honest, two qualities sorely lacking in these halls. She admits her limitations while defending her strengths. That's wisdom, not weakness." He looked at Lord Damien. "My vote is to approve. Mine as well," another noble added, a woman with silver hair. "The realm needs fresh perspectives, not more of the same inbred thinking." One by one, nobles began to speak. Some for, some against. But the tide was shifting. I could feel it. Not because I'd convinced them I was perfect, but because I'd shown them I was real. When the final vote came, it was 8-4 in my favor. Not unanimous, not overwhelming, but enough. Lord Damien looked like he'd swallowed poison. Lady Vera simply stared at me with undisguised hatred, but the kind-eyed noble smiled, just slightly, and nodded as though I'd passed some test he'd set that others hadn't understood. "The council recognizes Miss Wren Ashford as suitable companion to the king," the official recorder announced. "May her service to the realm be long and fruitful." I managed to maintain composure until I left the chamber. Then my legs nearly gave out, the adrenaline that had kept me upright suddenly deserting me. Felix caught my arm, steadying me. "That," he said with a wide grin, "was magnificent. The part where you basically called them all useless aristocrats? Nina's going to love hearing about that." "I went too far," I whispered, reaction setting in. "You went exactly far enough." Commander Rowan had joined us, his scarred face arranged in something almost like a smile. "They needed to see your spine. Now they know you're not someone to be pushed around." Cassius was waiting in his study, pacing like he had been for hours. When he saw me, relief and anxiety warred on his features. "Well?" 8-4, I said, in favor. He closed the distance between us in 3 strides, pulling me into his arms so tightly I could barely breathe. I knew it. He murmured against my hair. I knew they'd see what I saw. Cassius. I pulled back enough to see his face. "Damien and Vera voted against me. This isn't over. They're never going to accept." "Then they can leave my council," he said flatly. "I've tolerated their interference long enough. You're here to stay, Ren. It's official now. No more reviews, no more tests, no more questioning." He kissed me then, fierce and claiming, and I let myself believe him, let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found somewhere I belonged. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the memory of Lady Vera's expression as I'd left the chamber. Cold, calculating, and far from defeated. The weeks following the council review should have brought peace, but instead they brought a different kind of tension. The sharp-edged awareness that I'd made powerful enemies who wouldn't simply accept defeat, Lady Vera's cold smiles in passing, Lord Damien's calculating glances during court assemblies, the whispers that followed me through corridors like invisible knives. But there were victories too, small and significant. Cassius began including me in policy discussions, valuing my perspective on matters affecting common people, perspectives his other advisors simply didn't have. The palace staff, who'd once treated me with careful neutrality, started offering genuine warmth, and slowly, painfully, I began to believe I might actually belong here. Spring arrived with a violence of color that took my breath away, gardens exploding into bloom, the oppressive winter gray giving way to vivid greens and golds. Cassius and I spent mornings walking the grounds, his hand warm in mine, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his childhood, about the weight of expectations that had crushed the boy he'd been into the king he'd become. I told him about my mother, about hunger that went beyond physical, about learning to exist in spaces that didn't want you. "You saved me," he said one morning, stopping beneath a flowering tree that shed petals like snow. "I know everyone thinks I saved you, but it's the other way around. Before you, I was going through motions, playing a role. You reminded me how to be real." I kissed him then, standing on my toes to reach his lips, tasting spring and promise and a future I'd never dared imagine. But the universe, I was learning, had a cruel sense of timing. The attack came during a diplomatic reception, one of those elaborate affairs where nobles from neighboring territories gathered to discuss trade agreements and border disputes. I'd been dreading it for days, knowing I'd be on display, every interaction scrutinized for evidence of my inadequacy. The evening began smoothly enough. I wore deep blue silk that Mara had insisted brought out my eyes, my pale blonde hair arranged in elaborate braids that had taken hours. Cassius kept me close, his hand at the small of my back, introducing me to visiting dignitaries with pride that still amazed me. "Your Majesty's choice is unexpected," one elderly ambassador commented, his tone carefully neutral. "The best choices usually are," Cassius replied smoothly, and I loved him fiercely in that moment for defending me without hesitation. Felix and Mara worked the room with practiced ease, drawing difficult personalities into conversation, smoothing over awkward moments. Nina stood near the entrance with several guards, her sharp eyes constantly scanning for threats. Commander Rowan moved through the crowd like a shark through water, slow, deliberate, missing nothing. I was speaking with a visiting duchess about agricultural reforms when the screaming started. The main doors burst open and chaos flooded in. Armed figures in dark clothing, faces covered, weapons drawn. The crowd scattered, nobles shrieking and scrambling for cover. I heard Commander Rowan shouting orders, saw guards moving to intercept, felt Cassius's arm come around me like an iron band. "Get behind me," he commanded, but I was already moving, not away from danger, but toward it. Because I'd seen something no one else had noticed in the confusion. Lord Damien and Lady Vera slipping toward a side exit, and in Damien's hand, something that gleamed silver in the chandelier light. A signal device, I realized with sudden clarity. They'd orchestrated this. "Cassius!" I grabbed his arm, pointing. "Damien, An attacker lunged toward us, blade flashing. Cassius shoved me aside and engaged, his movements efficient and deadly despite his formal attire. More guards arrived, the tide turning against the attackers. But in the chaos, I saw Damien and Vera reaching the exit, saw them about to disappear. I ran. Behind me, I heard Cassius shout my name, heard Nina curse, but I was already through the crowd, dodging panicked nobles and clashing combatants. My elegant gown tangled around my legs, slowing me, so I grabbed the fabric and tore it without hesitation. The sound of ripping silk was drowned by the chaos. I caught them in the corridor beyond, empty, echoing. No witnesses. They turned at the sound of my footsteps, and Lord Damien's expression shifted from surprise to something darker. "Well," he said, lowering the signal device. "The little mouse has teeth after all." "You did this." My voice echoed off stone walls. "You brought attackers into the palace, endangered everyone here just to, what? Prove I don't belong? Undermine Cassius?" "To restore order," Lady Vera said coldly. "Before your influence corrupts everything this realm stands for, you're a weakness, a distraction. The king needs a proper queen, not some starving village rat playing dress-up." Rage flooded through me, not the hot, impulsive kind, but something colder and more focused. I'd spent my whole life being told I wasn't enough, wasn't worthy, didn't belong, and I was done accepting it. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "I am different from you. I know what it means to survive when the world wants you dead. I know how to see people's true faces beneath their polished masks. And I know..." I stepped forward, and something in my expression made Lady Vera actually retreat. "That you're terrified. Not of me specifically, but of what I represent. That your carefully maintained hierarchies are built on nothing but shared delusion. You little..." Lord Damien moved toward me, and I saw the knife in his hand a split second before he lunged. Training I didn't know I had, instincts honed by years of avoiding village cruelty, took over. I twisted aside, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into the wall. The knife clattered across the floor, and I kicked it away with my torn skirts swirling around me. Lady Vera stared, shock replacing her usual composure. How did you... "Being small and scared teaches you how to fight dirty," I said. "You should try it sometime. Might make you less insufferable." Footsteps thundered down the corridor. Commander Rowan, Nina, and a squad of guards, with Cassius at the lead. His eyes found me first, scanning for injuries, then moved to Lord Damien groaning against the wall and Lady Vera frozen in place. "What happened?" Cassius demanded, though his tone suggested he'd already guessed. "They orchestrated the attack," I said, gesturing to the signal device on the floor. "I saw Damien use it right before the doors burst open. They're responsible for everything." Commander Rowan picked up the device, his expression darkening. "This is military grade. Restricted access." He looked at Lord Damien. "You're going to tell me everything or I'll make you wish you died in that attack." What followed was swift and brutal. Under Commander Rowan's interrogation, Lord Damien cracked, revealing a conspiracy that went deeper than anyone had suspected. Nobles who'd planned to use the chaos to eliminate Cassius, install a puppet king, and maintain their power. Lady Vera had been the mastermind, Damien merely her tool. Both of them convinced that removing me would be step one in reclaiming control. They'd badly miscalculated. The trial was public, the evidence overwhelming. Both were stripped of titles, lands, and positions. Exile was the sentence, permanent banishment from the realm, sent to distant territories where their names meant nothing. I watched from beside Cassius as they were led away, Lady Vera's face twisted with impotent rage, Lord Damien already broken. I felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. "You could have been hurt," Cassius said that night as we stood in his chambers, finally alone. His hands framed my face, thumbs tracing my cheekbones as though confirming I was real and whole. "When I saw you run after them, I had to," I interrupted. "They were getting away, and I knew. I just knew they were responsible. I couldn't let them escape." "You're braver than anyone gives you credit for," he murmured, "including yourself." "I was terrified," I admitted, "but I was more angry. Angry at being underestimated, at being treated like I don't matter, at people like them thinking they can control everything through manipulation and violence. He pulled me close, and I felt his heart beating against my cheek. "The council wants to make it official," he said quietly. "After everything, after you stopped a conspiracy, after you proved yourself a dozen times over, they're formally requesting I name you queen." I pulled back to look at him. "What do you want?" "I want you," he said simply. "However you'll have me. As mate, as queen, as companion. The titles don't matter. You matter." The wedding took place 6 weeks later, as spring gave way to early summer. Not the elaborate state affair the council had initially suggested, but something smaller, more intimate, held in the palace gardens with only those who truly mattered in attendance. Felix and Mara stood with Cassius, while Nina stood with me, fierce and proud in formal attire. Commander Rowan officiated, his scarred face gentle as he spoke words about partnership and strength and choosing each other despite the world's objections. I wore simple white, my pale blonde hair loose and crowned with wildflowers that reminded me of fields near my old village. Cassius wore formal attire, but his eyes held nothing formal, just love. Pure and uncomplicated. "I was half dead when you found me," I said during my vows, my voice carrying across the garden. "Frozen and forgotten and convinced I'd always be nothing. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You chose me when I'd never been chosen. And you loved me when I was just learning to love myself. You saved me from a life of isolation." Cassius replied, his voice rough with emotion, "From going through motions without meaning. You taught me that strength isn't always loud, that worth isn't determined by birth, and that the best things in life are the ones we choose for ourselves. Consequences be damned." When we kissed as the sun set behind us, painting the garden in gold and rose, I felt the final pieces of my broken self snap into place, not fixed. I would always carry scars from my past, but transformed, made into something new and stronger. The celebration that followed was joyous chaos. Felix made a speech that was equal parts heartfelt and embarrassing. Mara laughed until she cried, and Nina admitted she'd bet money on me from the moment she heard I'd called out Lady Vera. Even the nobles who'd initially opposed me came to offer congratulations, genuine respect replacing their previous skepticism. Later, as the party wound down and stars emerged in the darkening sky, Cassius and I slipped away to walk the gardens alone. My feet ached from dancing, my face hurt from smiling, but I'd never been happier. "I keep thinking I'll wake up," I admitted, leaning into his warmth. "That this is just some elaborate dream before I freeze to death in that village square. If it's a dream, we're both having it," he said, pulling me closer. "And I never want to wake up." We stopped beneath the flowering tree, where he'd first told me I'd saved him, petals drifting down like blessings. He kissed me slowly, thoroughly, tasting like wine and promise. "I love you," I whispered against his lips. I didn't think I was capable of this, of feeling this much, trusting this much. "But you made it possible." "We made it possible," he corrected. "You and me, choosing each other every day despite every reason not to." The years that followed weren't without challenges. There were always people who questioned, who whispered about the village girl who'd somehow become queen. But I learned that their opinions mattered less than my own sense of worth, that I could hold power without losing compassion, that being different was strength, not weakness. I reformed laws affecting villages like mine, ensured that no one would freeze while others stood warm and indifferent. I created programs for forgotten Omegas, for those who'd been invisible, and slowly, the realm changed, not into something unrecognizable, but into something more just. Cassius ruled with strength, but I stood beside him with compassion, and together we were more than either of us could have been alone. On winter evenings, when snow fell soft and silent over the palace grounds, I would sometimes stand at the window and remember that frozen girl in the village square, certain she'd die alone and unmourned. And I would send her a silent message across time. "Hold on. Someone is coming who will see you. Someone is coming who will choose you. Hold on just a little longer." Because the greatest love story isn't about perfection. It's about being found when you're lost, being chosen when you're forgotten, being loved when you're convinced you're unlovable. It's about a king who looked past every conventional measure of worth and saw someone extraordinary. And it's about a girl who learned that surviving isn't the same as living, but with the right person beside you, you can transform from one into the other. We made history, Cassius and I, not because we were perfect, but because we were real. And in the end, that was enough. It was always enough.